Everyone. I'm
Hello.
Camille Taranis. I'm a studio artist and a graphic designer, and I also do illustration as well. Right now, my art practice is mainly just kind of like recoup from COVID, like going out and doing paintings as I feel. And my work is basically recruiting new business for Compass Group, which is where I work. We do proposals for big companies all over the world, which is very exciting. And then I also get to do a very fun aspect of my job, some custom illustration for each company, which is great.
Oh,
Um,
okay, that's great. And then thank you so much for participating this drawing exhibition at Dix Gallery. And could you explain your series of the drawings in this show?
Absolutely. I actually have 3 different sets of drawings in the show right now. A majority of the works are actually from 2020. It's pretty amazing, actually, that during 2020, I figured I would get to do less work. But actually, I've gotten to kind of go out and reinvigorate my mind just by making the newest work that I'm doing. It's very much kind of a conversation between myself and the landscape, which is something I used to do a lot when I was growing up. I actually grew up in Wisconsin, in a really gorgeous county called Door County. And it's very much known for like its wetlands, for the lake, and for Lake Michigan and Green Bay basically are the 2 big attractions up there. Everyone travels to it. Um, the parks are just gorgeous. But one of the aspects about it is that it's very touristy now. It's getting very overbuilt. And so the other drawings that are in the show, the ones that are more of a limited palette, they're more grayscale with a little bit of brown, a little bit of blue. Those pieces were actually created as a reaction to that, about the overbuilding of that area, about it transforming from natural landscape to something that has more of a human hand integrated into it. So, as far as my practice goes with relation to those, it's really just my reaction to the world in all of the sets that I'm showing. The third set is actually, when I'm creating them, I'm using photographs from online, but it's also similar to, I mean, they're both limited color works. The red, blue, and black and white pieces that I do, there's 2 of them, very large, which actually, let me just pull those up so you guys
Yes,
see
yes,
that.
please share your drawings so we can have a better understanding. Yes, thank you.
Can you see them?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So these pieces here, this Big Island Bleed, which is also limited palette, using some grays, some blues, and then the pops of red. These pieces are also reactions to that overbuilding of the landscape, but it's more subtle than the others. In this one, you can see just a simple tree house in the background. And it also originated with, there was a stake in the ground here that had a red tie, which I ended up taking out and putting this in more obvious. It just wasn't quite as noticeable. But when I was a child, one of the main indicators that there was going to be building was that you would see these ground stakes put in with a bright red tie around the top. So the red is really symbolic of that, of those ties that you would see. I'm trying to think what else you would want to know about my practice, hey.
Could you explain, like especially with these kind of STEAM study? I think this is kind of very interesting. So I would like to know that, what kind of paper are you using, how you create this kind of layer, like
Yeah,
this kind of transparency layer, and what kind of did you use, like ink or marker or everything watercolor?
absolutely. So these ones that have more of a layering element to them, the ones with the steam and with the smoke, as
Mm-hmm.
you were just discussing, they're they're actually done differently than the full color ones that I'm doing now. They're all on paper, but if you look very carefully, you can see that it is actually several sheets that have been glued together. This is actually like a bubbling in a tracing paper layer that has been adhered. And you can see where the stems of these just very shadowy trees go down. that is actually the edge of the tracing paper coming in and interacting with another layer of paper and a different layer of drawing behind.
Okay, so did you make this kind of multiple layer of kind of tracing paper on the top of the,
Yes. So you
okay,
can
the
see
main
here a
paper?
little better that it's actually a separate, very thin layer of tracing paper coming over the top. And I have a detail here. And what I've done is I work very similar to painting, where I'll do like an underpainting. You get like that horizon line in there, and then I'll build this like very vigorous, very textural grass layer. And what I'm doing is I'm actually using ink, graphite, and acrylic. So I'll start with my acrylic layer and get just this like shadow of blue. And I'll actually like throw, and I'm talking literally throw graphite at this. So you'll actually get kind of a smoky quality in the background. And that way you're actually having it. So that way, if you look, you can see here where there's, I wish I would have gotten even closer to this so you guys can see it better. But you can see that if you let it dry very slowly and you use a very thin but opaque wash of acrylic, you'll get little flecks of that material that will actually be left on the paper. And that's something that I love, is actually having the texture of the material left there. So you have like the hand of the maker left in the pieces. This one especially is very textural. You can see where I've got like graphite that is built up here, and you see like the edges of those like piles of graphite almost on the surface, those black edges. And then this is actually, if you see the pieces in person, which, hey, you took the video, which is fantastic. When you move past these, this is actually silver. So when you look at it from different angles, it actually looks different from each angle. This is ink over the top. We've once again got a layer of tracing paper in here that I've drawn over the top of with just a standard, I like a really dark, like 8B pencil. Love to work like that over the top of one of these sheets of paper. And the great thing is that it's very forgiving, and that's something that I love. It's something that is very similar to pressing the undo button when you're doing graphic design. You can put a layer of tracing paper in a drawing and have that be a fresh start to an extent, and then start drawing over the top with another medium. This is actually something that I learned while I was doing, while I was a graphic artist at Whole Foods Market. There's actually marker, a chalk marker that is white. And so it's very opaque, and you can work over the top of something that, you know, you wouldn't necessarily be able to restore to a complete white.
Okay, so why are you interested in this kind of STEAM, or how can say, like what is your kind of response? You know, like do you have a kind of emotion response, or just, you know, visually was interesting, or could you explain that?
Do you find the STEAM very visually interesting? But a big part of it too is the burning element of like destroying nature, or even the steam of like utilizing energy, which we all know comes from essentially destroying, burning oil. You know, in order to steam something, you have to find that energy somewhere to boil that water to produce energy for us. It's a form of consumption. So that's why I find them really interesting, is because they are essentially our humanity's way of consuming, is how I relate STEAM.
Okay, I think, yeah, that definitely help us to understand kind of better. And then this not the STEAM study, there's another kind of drawing with
so these colored
could you explain the color and some of the technique?
These are actually done in plein air. So they're done in real life. I go out into the landscape and I'll hike. I have a bag and I have a Pourchade box, which is basically a wooden artist box that I take out. And I sit down and I work in the beginning with watercolor, and I will build up my color layers. I'll start with the sky, usually because that's a lighter color. And that way you're able to integrate that through the drawing. So it doesn't look like you just have, I'm totally stereotyping here, the blue sky above and none of the blue incorporated into your landscape. Instead, you know, you're getting those bits of like here the gray, brown sky is carried through into portions of the rest of the drawing. And so I'll start with that. It's actually watercolor wash. And then I'll let it dry so that way you get these areas where there's still like these elements of bleeding, where you can still see the hand of the artist essentially with that watercolor. And then I will seal it. I'll use a pH neutral sealant. And that way, when I come back, I can actually have a very fluid motion into these essentially brush areas. Like I use a nib. So if you don't seal the surface, the nib will actually catch a lot more and the paper will actually absorb the ink. So you'll end up with a lot of bleed areas in those dark marks. And I want those to be very clean. Essentially, I'm using those dark areas to define portions of the color. So you can see the floral elements, you can see the trees and these blades of grass.
So these kind of lines from the kind of ink at the after watercolor.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, after the watercolor. So I do the watercolor layer first with all of the color, and then I'll seal it. And then I'll use my nib and I'll go back in with the fine line drawing over the top. And occasionally I'll also go back and I'll redefine elements. Like I've put some pops of white in here to just define these flowers a little more and make them pop forward. Or this one, actually, I reworked quite a bit. You can see that in here, there are elements of that fine line drawing that are actually completely overlapped by color. So like getting a bit more bold popping color in there brings those areas forward.
And then all these kind of watercolor drawings, did you do in the kind of one place or the different place or different dates?
They're done in all different places. I essentially do them whenever I have free time. Some of them were actually done in my home county, in Door County, last summer. And then once I came back to North Carolina, I've found miscellaneous places around. Actually, it's very strange, the places that I find to be interesting or unique. I like to feel alone when I make these. And a lot of those places sometimes are behind corporate headquarters. Like I will go and I will find a grocery store that has a large Coolidge pond behind it, and it's got a lot of really gorgeous, colorful foliage. Or, for example, this one is actually at a pond on the UNC Charlotte campus here. So they're all over.
Okay.
I really like doing them in the summer, but I've done some of them in the fall. I like to be comfortable when I do them, so I haven't done very many in the winter. I only have a couple that were done in the autumn. They were done in mid-November, and then it just got a little too chilly for me. I've found it really interesting as I've done them too, because this is kind of a way for me to get back into doing full color again, because I haven't done full color work in a very long time. It's been almost 10 years. But it's very interesting for me seeing, you know, how the light affects the color, how the time of year affects the color, where you're sitting, the plants that you're painting, you know, each one, it kind of has a different color to it. And also if you have water nearby, how it makes it cooler, how when things are in the distance, it gets a little bit cooler. All interesting observations that I've enjoyed.
Okay, so your kind of STEAM study, you intentionally do kind of limited kind of color palette.
Yes,
right?
There's be more ominous.
Yes. But these kind of the autumn or these kind of colorful kind of landscape in the watercolor, so you are more kind of spontaneously and just kind of your kind of response, but you have a kind of open for the, how can I say, just kind of color. So whatever you see or response, you know, just change of the by light or change by place or change by, you know, kind of the sunlight or the sky or water, you just, you know, reflecting just kind of variety of color you are trying to capture.
Conversation with what's going on around you more than the others. The others are done from photographs. So the limited palette ones that are more grays, they're done from pictures that I've found on the internet, just from my own research. And I pull things that I think are visually stimulating or very frightening from a perspective of landscape, I'll choose photos that capture that for me. And then I'll make a drawing that kind of combines those elements together. Whereas these, they are done strictly from life. So they're about enjoying the landscape. They're about going out and just kind of relaxing and doing what I feel.
Mhm. Okay. So what is your kind of drawing in your art practice?
How do I think of drawing?
How does the drawings kind of play the role in your kind of art practice?
So the way that I think of drawing is probably different from the way that other people think of, the stereotypical idea of just, a pencil on paper or, ink on paper. I think of drawing as any kind of mark making at all. So if I'm using what some people would consider to be stereotypical painting methods, where I'm using paint and I'm making a mark on canvas, I don't necessarily consider that to be completely painting. I would also consider that to be drawing, because I see drawing as any form of mark making. It could be anything from using charcoal on paper to, actually cutting something out of paper and gluing that element down on the page. So I guess in that way, drawing is an outlet for me. It's kind of a way of seeing outside of the box in a certain way. I'm trying to think how to explain it. I don't feel that you should be limited in drawing to think of it as just, particular mediums are drawing. I think that you should use any tool that you feel will accomplish your goal or will allow you to make what you want to make. And that's part of the reason why I think it's very important to have, standard drawing classes where you're learning about a medium and how to perceive things and how to put it down on paper accurately. But it's also important because you're learning what tools are available to you so that you can make whatever you would like, if that makes sense.
Okay. And then I see that you have all these, kind of small kind of study, and then there's kind of the watercolor, but you also display kind of two big, kind of a more kind of developed kind of drawing. So I just kind of wonder, when you do have a, like, let's say small kind of intimate, drawing practice, or when you have a, these kind of the big kind of drawing pieces, like, is it your process is different, or do you have a more kind of plan for that, or how does it different?
Yes, there is a very different plan behind the two, because with the ones that are more limited palette, because I'm working from actual visual research on the internet, I'm actually like figuring out what I'm going to put on the page before I start. And they're very time consuming because I'm actually planning out what's going to go where and how I'm going to make something. When I was an undergraduate student, I was actually a sculptor, and I actually have made drawings in the round that are completely three-dimensional. And when you're making pieces that are very heavily researched or more researched, there's just so much time and planning that goes into them. You're doing preliminary sketching and figuring out where things are going to go, and you'll go on the internet and you'll find, 80 different pictures of things that you could use in it. And then you have to narrow down, okay, well, this will go with this will go with that. Like, these things will interact better than those will. So the limited palette study pieces that I'm doing, these larger pieces like this, they actually take about the same amount of time as doing something small like this little guy. This guy is 6 inches by 5.5, but he took the same amount of time as this big fellow, because the same amount of research goes into both of them. I'm looking for images that I can pull from to do them. And really, the main difference is that you're just scaling up you're just making something bigger.
Mm.
So I'm using a bigger brush, you know, I'm not using the nib so much in these. I'm using more of, instead of a nib, it's, you know, 20 times larger with a paintbrush. So it's still the same amount of strokes, or, you know, this might be a few more strokes, but when you get down to something like this, you can see all of the tiny little strokes that are in the back here, all of these strokes down here, and this is multiple layers. You're waiting for the glue to dry to make sure that you're going to get a good seal. There are just so many unpredictable elements to it after the planning that actually what's really funny is I didn't realize it at the time because I really enjoyed making this work. But it's so time consuming, and having a full-time position outside of just fine art really makes it so that your time is limited. And one of these pieces was taking me so much time. And as much as I hate to be like, it's about the gratification of finally finishing something and feeling accomplished, at the end of the day, one of these pieces was taking me weeks to finish, because when you're doing each layer separately and planning everything out, it kind of sucked the soul out of it for me, as much as I love them. And I would go back and make more. But that's the difference between those and these, is that one of these studies, I'm going out and, you know, in half a day I can make 2 drawings as opposed to spending weeks laboring away on something that's multiple layers and has actually kind of the same amount of marks. It's just the amount of planning and kind of construction, because you're like building so much with a piece like this versus these, which are, you know, 3 layers as opposed to 10 layers of different drawing elements.
Okay.
So the process is very different.
So I think, you know, it's not about, you know, size and medium. And then I think I can definitely see that it's just different way of your working your drawing. You know, it's planning and then kind of, you know, heavy research behind it, and then lots of layer. Or you have to actually go outside, and that the place, you know, that the moment you are really engaging in the place and then doing it's kind of journey which you cannot plan. You just have to, you know, follow where you are.
It's very spontaneous. Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think that's a different way of your kind of, you know, drawing, that, you know, when we know that how you make this kind of drawing, you know, not only the kind of result we are seeing, but I think we are here how you do it, you know, it give us to kind of access to understand kind of better, you know,
Thank you.
better of the drawings. Yes, that's great. And the Camille, thank you so much for participating in this exhibition, and then thank you so much for you know, sharing your concept and technique and all the details.
Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.